All right, we got about 20 participants. Very nice.
Hey, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have so many of you here in person in New York City, as well as our amazing community online. My name is Andrea Louie, and I'm the Executive Director of the Serica Initiative. It's really our pleasure to be able to be hosting this incredibly meaningful event this evening with our partners at Potluck Asian America. And we're excited to be, observing another Japanese American Day of Remembrance. So we look forward to hearing about that story. First, I'll share that the Serica Initiative is a nonprofit organization based here in New York City, and our mission is to amplify the amazing work that Asian Americans are already doing here in this country. And we do that through storytelling, convening, and empowering. And I think that it's safe to say that in this event and the story that you're about to hear, you're going to hear us ticking off all those boxes in terms of the terrific work. So first of all, I'd like to share a little bit about some of our upcoming events. We do have a webinar this coming Sunday called Trade Secrets for AAPI Top College Admissions. So for those of you who have family members or who have young people in your lives who are looking to make a difference in their careers and their educational futures, please tune in for that free seminar for those top tips. Also, coming up on next Friday, we have another online event in which one of our board members, Lisa Lim, will be leading a conversation with some of her colleagues about the amazing work that Asian American women in particular are making on boards. And finally, we have our fundraising event coming up on April 30th, our Power of Us Gala. So we look forward to welcoming so many of you to that event. And if you'd like to volunteer, please let us know. So with that, I'd love to introduce Sue Lee here, who is representing Potluck Asian America. So thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my name is, as Andre said, my name is Sue Lee. I'm representing Potluck Asian America. We started a few years ago. We're still a relatively new nonprofit. However, our mission, I mean, we're small, but we're mighty. We're doing, this year is really starting off with bang. We're doing some really wonderful events. We started the organization to really educate people in the community about what's happening. Within New York, there's so many things happening, and we wanted to be that one central place where people can go to find information about different events, what's going on in the many different and dynamic Asian American communities here in New York. We wanted to also be a convener at that gather and provide spaces for people to communicate and connect with each other. Anybody who has an interest in Asian American culture and history and events are all welcome to come. It's kind of like a potluck. Everybody can bring something, people can take what they want and actually come away with something a lot more than what they came in with. So that is really our mission. What we do is we have a website with all of these different events and resources. We have a directory of nonprofit organizations that serve our community that people can learn more about. We have our own events, and we also work to list other events from other organizations that people might, want to learn more about. So we hope that you will sign up to join our website, get your newsletter in your inbox every day. I'm sorry, not every day, every other week. We're not going to do that to you. Every other week. And we also, please follow us on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. So I wanted to talk about some of the events that we do have coming up. If you go to the next slide, I just pressed this.
No, it's in there.
Okay, there we go. We do have a production. The Roundabout Theater has a production of Chinese Republicans. It's community night. Tickets are normally $75 to $140, but for that night, it's $20 for anybody who wants to come. And that is on February 28th. You can just find out more about it by going to potluckasianamerica.org, and it will be on homepage. Also, we have Mahjong night Mahjong is very popular now. And so please come and, and learn about that by going on our website. Anybody's welcome. You don't have to be an expert. You can know absolutely nothing about Mahjong and still have a good time. And with all of Potluck's events, we have a lot of really good people. So please come. So that's it.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to play a little bit of musical chairs here. So just so we can maintain here on camera. So I'd now like to introduce one of our amazing speakers for this evening. This is my friend and colleague, Kyoko Miyabe, who is going to be our moderator for this evening. So Kyoko was born in Yokohama, Japan, and received her PhD in English literature at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. She is chair of the Humanities and Sciences Department at the School of Visual Arts in New York. You have many, many publications and a very, very accomplished career. And you're also a visual artist yourself, and a practicing one at that. So I applaud you for having an academic career as well as a creative practice. Most recently, a selection of her pen and ink drawings was published in Celia Bland's collection of poetry, Cherokee Roadkill. So with that, I'd love to, invite you to introduce your wonderful colleagues, and we really thank you for bringing this book to life and really sharing the remarkable story of Nancy's family. So thank you so much. Mariko, I'll invite you to switch your feed. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here in person as well as here on Zoom. My name is Kyoko Miyabe, and I will be moderating this evening's talk on By the Shore of Lake Michigan. It's a Tanka poetry collection written by two Issei, or first-generation Japanese American poets named Tomiko and Ryokuyō Matsumoto. I'm one of the co-translators of this book, which was originally published in Japanese in 1960. I am joined here by my wonderful colleagues in person and on Zoom. And I'd like to first introduce to Nancy Matsumoto, our team leader, an award-winning writer and editor. She's also the editor of this book, By the Shore of Lake Michigan. She is also the granddaughter of the poets, Tomiko and Ryokuyō Matsumoto. And next to me is Mariko Aratani. She's also the co-translator of the book. She's also the former professor of Japanese language at Fordham University here in New York City. We also have Yasuhara. She is the writer of the introductory essay to By the Shore of Lake Michigan. She's also a former professor of Japanese literature and Dean Emerita at California State University, San Bernardino. So our heartfelt gratitude goes to the Serica Initiative. Thank you so much, Andrea Louis, and your wonderful team members, Michelle Meyer-Uri, Julie Azuma, and Lucy Yang. Thank you so much. And also our thanks go to Potluck Asian America, Sylvie, and Julie Azuma. Thank you so much for being the generous host for this in-person portion of the event. So in the next 50 minutes or so, we'll be introducing our book to you, By the Shore of Lake Michigan. It'll be kind of in two parts. So in the first part, we'll offer some information, background, context to better understand the book. Then we'll take turns reading a few poems from the book, and then we'll open up for Q&A in the last 10 minutes of this event. So if I could jump right in by turning to you, Nancy. I wonder if you could share a little bit about your family background and how this English translation book project came to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyoko, for that lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here, everyone. I'd like to thank Andrea and the Serica team, Julie, and everyone at Potluck Asian American for so generously hosting this event tonight. I am a third-generation Japanese American born in Chicago and raised in Los Angeles. I'm trying to talk and advance slides here, so bear with me as I try to get the slide to move. There we go. So By the Shore of Lake Michigan was written by my maternal grandparents, Tomiko and Ryokuyō Matsumoto. My grandfather arrived in America in 1917. Both he and my grandmother were from Chiba Prefecture. They settled in Chicago. This family picture is from 1926 in Chicago, and they settled in Seattle. This is from 1926 in Seattle, and later moved to Los Angeles. My parents and their families on both sides of my family were incarcerated during World War II. My father's side in Manzanar and then Tule Lake, and my mother's San Ana Racetrack, and then moved to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. This is an image from the original book. You can see the heart-shaped mountain in the background, barracks in the foreground. And this rather incongruous photo is my grandmother standing in front of the barracks. I don't really know why she was dressed in kimono, but she was. So I had always known that my grandparents wrote poetry. I saw the poetry journals and books that they read. There were trophies in their house of Tanka prizes that my grandmother had won. I remember my grandmother telling me she felt a little under stress because she had a Tanka deadline, which I, as a writer, can really relate to. And she told me once she wrote a poem about me. So this is a picture of Tomiko with one of her sho or awards, this one giving for having a poem selected in the annual Utakai Hajime, which is the imperial poetry ceremony that's held once a year. So I knew they had published a book, and as I grew older, I became more curious what could be in this. I was very close to Tomiko growing up, and I think it was my relationship with her and really wanting to be able to communicate with her better that led me to study Japanese and eventually really want to be able to read this book. So I became more and more curious about what was in it. And this is the frontispiece of the original Japanese language edition. You see it has a nice woodblock print there. So I started off on what became a 15-year journey to translate this book. Started in about 2010 as really a family project. I thought maybe my parents and my siblings and perhaps my cousins would be interested in what's in the book. I asked my dear friend Kyoko, who is our moderator, to help me on it. And so I made PDFs of every page in the book, and we started passing them back and forth. We would get together after work, after hours, and work on the editing and the translations. And here is an example of the PDF of the original pages that we worked on. By about 2015, 5 years later, it took us a long time because this was part-time, we had a completed version which we presented at the Tanka Society of America. They had an annual meeting. This one was in Albany. And the feedback was good, but we were told, there were certain Tanka conventions, things that we, not being professional Tanka translators, needed to think about. So at this point, for some reason, I decided, okay, we're going to get another translator, and launched a nationwide and really worldwide search for someone who had experience. I came across the name of an amazing translator named Mariko, who's here, and I loved a book that she had translated called Ink Dark Moon. It's a translation of two Heian era, middle-aged era women court poets. Absolutely gorgeous. I recommend it. Couldn't find her, chased her all across the country. Finally called her co-writer on this book and found out that she lived 10 minutes away from me on the Upper East Side. So that was the next big step, milestone in getting her. So then, another 6 years pass. We have a second version, countless iterations of each poem, really hard work, but very interesting, fascinating. Then, could we find a publisher? No one wanted to publish it until Karen Umemoto at UCLA Asian American Studies Press in about 2018 expressed interest, and I was overjoyed. Part of the process is you have to get it read, reviewed, accepted by an academic press. And Karen suggested that to write an introductory essay that would kind of bridge the academic and the popular audiences. Maybe I should go to Eri Yasuhara. Amazingly enough, Eri and I had spoken 4 years earlier in 2014 when I interviewed her for what became the I always get this wrong, the foreword to the book. We were having a debate about foreword and introduction. So this was a really long journey. It took another 6 years after that to actually have it come out. But for me, it's been the most personally rewarding project of my career. I loved working with this team of amazing women. We've all become very tight-knit, and we are really shocked, but maybe not so much about the kind of attention it's gotten, because this is a time when it's really crucial to tell these stories of incarceration and share them. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you, Nancy. I wonder if I could now turn to you, Mariko. So this book is an English translation of Tanka poetry. A lot of people may be familiar with haiku, another Japanese poetic form. Maybe not as familiar. Some of the audience members, perhaps joining on Zoom, may not be as familiar with the Tanka poems. I wonder, Mariko, if you could explain a little bit about Tanka, its characteristics, history, and perhaps its uniqueness as a storytelling modality.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. Tanka, also called waka in the pre-modern period, is the oldest form of Japanese poetry that has been written for over 1,300 years. It is still and enthusiastically practiced today. Traditionally, a tanka is a single untitled vertical line consisting of 31 syllables in total. These 31 syllables are divided into 5 units with a syllable pattern of 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. I recite this tanka as an example of the syllable pattern. Imakuru, 5. 사진 아비츠 7, 고겐니 5, 카리즈미 시바시 7, 센지 사나가오 7. Haiku, which is even shorter with only 17 syllables, often focusing on nature, the changes of seasons, and the emotions evoked by them. In contrast, Tanka has always embraced a wide range of themes: love, personal emotions, seasonal reflections, social concerns, etc. It's a poetic form that allows for deep personal expressions, making it particularly a suitable and significant outlet for Tomiko and Ryokuyō to directly express their emotions in times of hardship or change. In the camp's harsh, desolate environment, with hardly any diverse nature, delicate seasonal changes. Over time, tanka writing as well as haiku writing became national pastime activities. Today, tanka is practiced at many levels, from casual writers to master poets. However, it is really remarkable that so many people at the national level in Japan are engaged in not only reading but writing tanka or haiku poems. Nowadays, the tanka writing population is estimated to be 500,000. The haiku population is a stunning 6 million. So why does tanka hold such a deep place in Japanese culture? There are 2 key reasons: rhythm and brevity. For some reason, the rhythm of the combination of 5 and 7 syllables sounds so pleasant, natural, and expressive to Japanese people's ears, as if they are the heartbeat. In Japanese, each syllable has the same length, unlike English. For example, in English, words like the and street have one syllable each, but the length of each syllable is very different. On the other hand, in Japanese, phrases such as Sora to Yama and then Itsu Mitemo have 5 syllables each and have exactly same length and rhythmic patterns. It is no problem to distinguish 5 and 7 syllables. This Tanka format, 5, 7,
It's okay.
This Tanka format of 57577 was already established in the oldest extant poetry collection called the Manyoshu, completed in the mid-8th century. Since then, the format hasn't changed at all. The Manyoshu comprises more than 4,500 Tanka poems composed, including oral tradition, by people of various statuses, such as royal family members, aristocrats, soldiers, street performers, peasants, and ordinary people. It seems Tanka has been already established by them as a national literary activity among the whole general population. This tradition has been continuing until now. 5 and 7 syllable words and phrases are embedded even in everyday life, not just in poetry, but in posters, advertisements, slogans, song lyrics, etc. For Japanese people, the combination of 5 and 7 syllables is easy to absorb and remember, and is impactful. They feel Tanka at an almost instinctive, innate, visceral level. The second reason for the fascination with Tanka and also haiku is the short form. For Japanese people who already have the inner rhythmic sense of the syllable pattern, it is not difficult mentally and psychologically to start writing a short Tanka poem in this definite format. The short form is deceptively simple. However, while it may seem easy to write just 31 syllables, crafting a truly great Tanka takes a time of practice. It requires the poet to balance constraint and freedom, to fit deep emotions and meaning into a few short lines. For many, this pursuit is a lifelong artistic passion, just like it was for Tomiko and Ryokuyō. Growing up in Japan until young adulthood, studying Tanka and haiku since elementary school, reading and expressing themselves through these poetic forms, and being surrounded by the rhythm of 5 and 7 syllables in their everyday lives, this rhythm must have remained deeply ingrained in Tomiko and Ryokuyō's senses for the rest of their lives. While being incarcerated in the camp, stripped of their freedom and facing uncertainty, they turned to Tanka to express their emotions and preserve their cultural identity. In the barren environment with little connection to the changing seasons or natural beauty, they found solace in the 31 syllables that had shaped their lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariko. I wonder if I could circle back to you, Nancy. So Mariko, that really beautiful explanation of the Tanka form and the particular appeal Tanka formats have had for both Tomiko and Ryokuyō Matsumoto. Nancy, I wonder if you might have any additional perspective on why they came to choose Tanka, let's say, as opposed to haiku, and their lifelong engagement with Tanka poetry. I also wonder if you could share a little bit about the background of how the original Japanese Tanka poetry collection came to be published.
Yes, I'm happy to. For your first question, why Tanka rather than haiku, I never really spoke to them about this choice, so this is a little bit of speculation on my part. But knowing them, my guess is that Tanka offered a much more capacious canvas. As Mariko described, Tanka can really cover so many different topics, whereas haiku tends to be more nature-focused. This is a picture of my grandfather as a young man. Both my grandparents were deeply interested in literature, art. My grandfather was a wonderful artist and calligrapher. They both loved animals, nature, plants, and gardening. These two, I believe the ones on the left, are examples of my grandfather's calligraphy. As Mariko has pointed out, Ryokuyō loved to write tanka about current events and politics. They both wrote a lot about family, friends. They wrote poems about their pets, their activities, in addition to many poems about flowers, plants, trees, and vegetables. Their poems reflect the rich set of interests that they had and the many ties they cultivated with family, but also with cherished friends from poetry, as well as prison camp circles. Well, I believe that they both wrote tanka and maybe haiku before Heart Mountain. It was at the prison camp where, one, they had time to devote to pursuing it seriously, and two, they were with a set of well-known and gifted teachers who were able to guide them as they delved into the form more deeply. But as they both mentioned in their poems, after the prison camp closed, they had to work very hard to eke out a living in a still racist society, even in Chicago, which was considered less so than the West Coast. Ryokuyō mentioned in his diaries how, in his poem, how his diary entries had become so slapdash because he was so busy between work and raising 3 children. They had very little free time. It's a picture from their Chicago period, a portrait of their growing family, which now includes the spouses of my uncle and aunt. So family was very important to them, yet they made time to pursue their passion for tanka writing, and they somehow continued to write, contribute to publications. Even on their trip to Japan, which happened in 1956, it was their first time back to their home country in 35 years. Even that was built around visiting, of course, friends and family, but also literary and historic sites that they really wanted to see. This trip was about visiting the homes or birthplaces of their tanka poetry icons, and it was very much about gathering impressions and insights for more poems, because they wrote so many while they were in Japan. They visited the Imperial Palace. This is Ryokuyō there, because of the poetry connection. As for how the original 1960 tanka collection came to be published, it's kind of an interesting story. I had always been told growing up by my mother that this book was a vanity project, that my grandparents just wanted to see their poems in print, and so they had paid for this themselves. I discovered very, very late in this 15-year journey to publication of By the Shore of Michigan that this was completely not true. That what in fact happened was that Tomiko, perhaps helped by the renown she had gained in 1955 when her poem was selected for the Imperial Utakai Hajime poetry ceremony, she'd been invited to publish as part of an anthology a 300-volume series that spanned the entire 90-year history of the Utato Kanjo Poetry Society, to which she was a member, she belonged. And so the editor of Utato Kanjo sent me these 2 pictures from their offices in Tokyo. This first one is a picture of the entire 300-volume series that my grandparents' book was a part of. And then this close-up of their book, circled number 36. And so again, without this project, I would not have known this, nor would I have known so much more about my grandparents' inner thoughts and feelings during a really, really turbulent period of their lives. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity and the experience that we had together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Really amazing story. Now I wonder, Ari, if I could invite you, and if I could also ask your family background. I understand also that your father had a lifelong engagement with Tanka poetry. And I wonder if all this also informed your writing of the introductory essay to the book.
Be happy to. Thank you. Thank you, Kyoko. And good evening to everybody. Our thanks to all for your efforts to make this event happen. And Julie, it's a pleasure to be back in your loft, even if it's just virtually. As for family background, well, I come from a post-World War II immigrant family. We came to this country in 1953, a family of 5. We thus share similar experiences as the many Japanese who came here after the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, also called the McCarran-Walter Act, made immigration from Japan possible again, though still restricted, for the first time since 1924. In a sense, that made us Shin Issei, new Issei, or a new first generation of immigrants, at least on my father's side. Things are a little bit more complicated on my mother's side. My mother's parents were, if I can use the term, typical Issei, who immigrated here before 1924, making my mother a second-generation Japanese American, or Nisei, born in California in 1918. But when she was 5 years old, her mother took her back to Japan, and my grandfather stayed in California to work and send money to them, returning to Japan a few times for a visit. This was not an unusual arrangement at the time. Many Nisei were sent back or went back to spend varying amounts of time with relatives in Japan and to be educated in Japanese schools, some staying years, some their whole lives, others just a few months. So my mother, a Nisei, grew up in Japan from the age of 5 and was thus thoroughly acculturated as a Japanese. But after she graduated secondary school, she came back to the U.S. to be with her father. And at that point, she became a Kibei Nisei, someone born in the U.S. of Issei parents who spent time in Japan and then subsequently returned to the land of their birth, the U.S. The word Kibei, there's no slide for this, but it's Kibei. The word Kibei means return to America. In my mother's case, however, there's a further twist. She rejoined her mother in Japan right before the outbreak of war, so that she and my grandmother spent the war years in Japan while my grandfather was incarcerated, first at Rower, then Manzanar and Tule Lake. The family was reunited in 1953 when my mother, now married and herself the mother of 2, sort of returned to the U.S. with her entire family. And so partly because of this background, I grew up in a culturally and linguistically very Japanese home. In many ways, our family were very like the earlier generation of Issei immigrants and underwent similar experiences, though obviously separated by 40 years and a world war, and no incarceration camps for the Shin Issei. One specific similarity with the Matsumotos was that my parents also started studying and writing Tanka, though in the late 1960s. They were active in the Southern California Tanka writing scene, which was itself quite active, and my father was also honored by having his poem selected for the Utakai Hajime at the Imperial Court, just like Tomiko Matsumoto in the 1950s. As a side note, let me add that my parents, in fact, knew the Matsumotos, who lived in the same city, a suburb of Los Angeles. And in the course of many conversations about this project, Nancy and I discovered that we had grown up within a few miles of each other, though we went to different high schools and our paths never crossed. I think it's probably this sort of mixed background that has contributed to a long-standing interest I have in identity and the evolution of self-identity among Japanese and Japanese Americans, especially in the literature. I've long been interested in when and how a Japanese immigrant, usually a person, but it can also be a cultural practice or an institution, becomes Japanese American. And also the reason why I chose to highlight this theme, along with some others, in my introductory essay to the book by the shore of Lake Michigan. I try to trace in the Tanka expressions of the evolution of Tomiko and Ryokuyō's identity from Japanese immigrant to enemy alien, of course that was an identity imposed on them, to Japanese American citizens. Finally, just returning to my mother for a minute, I saw a similar development in her self-identity, a dawning awareness of the distance that increasingly separated her from the fully Japanese woman she was when she re-immigrated in 1953. After returning from a visit to Japan for the first time in 20 plus years, she said, in effect, "I'm not Japanese anymore." And toward the end of her life, it seemed to me that the Kibe part of her identity, the part that had returned to America, that made her unique even among the Japanese American community, had become very important to her. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ari. Now I'd love for us to take turns reading a few poems we selected, those that resonate with us strongly or those that we believe are important to the experience of reading by the shore of Lake Michigan. So we'll read in the English translation first, then Japanese, and then we'd love to also talk a little bit about each poem, offering our interpretations, additional context, analysis of the poems through the lens of Japanese American history and or Asian American identity. So Mariko, you could,
Sure.
that'd be lovely. Great.
Is it secretly watching over 10,000 people sound asleep? The moon above Heart Mountain shines clearly tonight. 1万4人の霊気密かに伺うか、今宵服部領の月は冴えたり。Japanese culture has a deep connection with the moon, especially in the ages when the night was much darker. People were keenly and affectionately aware of the moon as the object for worship and mirror reflecting all kinds of the viewer's emotions. It is not only a cosmological symbolic existence or the source of light, but also it carries resonant meanings such as aesthetics, emotion, and ethics. In Japanese poems, there are many more featuring the moon than the ones featuring the sun. There's a traditional moon viewing celebration in September, of which a full moon is considered as the most beautiful moon. However, we also admire its changing shapes, even when the moon is partially hidden by clouds. The moon's every stage, through its waxing and waning, has a different name. It reflects Japanese aesthetics to appreciate beauty, even in imperfection, ambiguousness, evocativeness, etc. There are two poems featuring the moon in this book. The one is by Tomiko, that was chosen for the Imperial Poetry Celebration after the war. It is about the very delicate serene beauty of the moonlight. But I would like to talk about the other poem here, this one, also by Tomiko, written in the prison camp. The stark contrast between the beautiful, shining, maybe the full moon, and the land with countless barracks where about 10,000 people are sleeping, the symbol of atrocity, is stunning. This was written at the early stage of the camp life. She used a personification of the moon, as in secretly watching over 10,000 people, as if the moon was a protector. After losing everything, having been sent to this desolate land, having nothing familiar in the environment, this moon was almost the only thing to which she could project all of her emotions: anger, grief, humiliation, frustration, but most of all, probably consolation, the sense of togetherness with other prisoners, and resolution of being resilience.
You can come forward to the camera a little more. Just move forward.
Well, mine hit the-
No one can hear you on mine.
Oh,
Yeah.
the second tanka I would like to recite is by Ryokuyō. In the midst of war, along with our countrymen, there might come a day when we leave the camp. How poignant that moment will be. 戦時さなか、同胞こぞり、センターを。いずる日あらん、哀れその時。There were challenges we faced during the effort to translate these tanka poems. This one is a good example regarding one of those challenges. There are certain words specific to Japanese which are very difficult to translate. The best example is the word aware. In the modern Japanese, it means pitiable, poor, etc. However, in the archaic Japanese, it conveys so many emotions, from simply alas to appreciation, beauty, sadness, gladness, mysteriousness, despair, hope, etc. Sometimes combination of these emotions. Although we use the word poignant or aware in this tanka, this aware tells very complicated feelings Ryokuyō must have felt, such as anger, misery, gladness of leaving the camp, sadness of departing from people, relief at the end of the war, etc., etc. Aware can express all these emotions mixed, but there is no equivalent word in English, so we had to choose a single English word, poignant, for this context. That is probably a little less evocative than the Japanese original. Thank you.
Nancy, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. So my first poem is by Tomiko. It reads, in the midst of swirling dust, I live temporarily in this barren land during wartime. Fukimakuru sajin abitsutsu, kogen karisumu shibashi, senji sanaka wo. This is the very first poem of the book, probably written very shortly after the Matsumoto's arrival at Heart Mountain in August of 1942. There is a sense of first impression, and it encapsulates, one, the absolutely barren, hostile landscape that must have been a shock for them coming from the semi-tropical oasis of Los Angeles, with the Pacific Ocean to the west, beautiful green mountains to the east, palm trees, jacarandas, and citrus everywhere. Second, Tomiko specifically calls out the dust, which in every account of the harsh prison camps was omnipresent, forcing its way through the gaps in the barrack planks, covering everyone's belongings, an irritant that would have worn down inmates' sense of mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Third, she uses the word shibashi, or temporarily, which is poignant because no one really had a clue about how long this horrible exile and imprisonment would last. Would the government realize they did not pose a threat, as clearly they did not? And would they be let go before the end of the war? If not, how long would the war last? In her sensitive foreword to the book, if I may quote Ari, she points out several powerful combinations of word sounds and imagery in the poem. The suffix makuru in fukimakuru, swirling or blowing, has the effect of intensifying the action of the verb, lending it great power, while the verb abitsutsu, or being showered, emphasizes the feeling of being pelted or assaulted. In this brief tanka, Tomiko creates a rhythm of images and sounds that, as Ari notes, are a metaphor for the uncontrollable impact of war itself on the hapless inmates at Heart Mountain. She calls it overall a masterful opening tanka. The second poem I picked was also by Tomiko, and it reads, a glimpse at a poetry salon became my destiny. Now, even on days of blizzard, I won't miss a poetry meeting. Utakai ni nozokishi koto ga en to nari, fubuki no hi ni mo utakae kakasazu. I picked this poem because it captures the precise moment that truly changed Tomiko's life, opening up her deep, passionate pursuit of Tanka writing at a time that must also have seemed to her the low point of a classic immigrant's tale of hard work, sacrifice in order to create a better future for one's children. The line, even on days of blizzard, reminds us that she is not indulging in a bourgeois salon in the comfortable Los Angeles living room of Takayanagi sensei, her Tanka instructor, but this was happening against the very harsh backdrop of a concentration camp. We think back to that opening poem of the harsh dust storm and remember that yes, both this poem and that poem are true. Tomiko found an intellectual and artistic oasis amid the harsh, barren desert landscape. It was one that would nourish her and give her strength, not just in the camp, but for years to come during good and bad times. I'd also like to point out the term entonari, indicating that a deep connection has been made. The phrase can be used in many different ways in Japanese to describe a close emotional tie to a dear friend or a connection between two countries or organizations. It carries the sense that fate or destiny, that mysterious forces have created something powerful, lasting, and true. Sorry about that. For Tomiko, discovering Tanka at Heart Mountain was like coming upon a beautiful flower in the desert, an auspicious, deeply nourishing bond that was forged between Tomiko and Tanka poetry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Erin.
Yes, these are the two that I selected, and they're both by Tomiko. When I respond Chinese to the inquiring words of one white person, he smiles and asks for a handshake. 一白人の問わす言葉にシナ人と言えば微笑み握手求めん. The first poem that Nancy just discussed is also one of my favorites because, as she points out, it expresses brilliantly the physical hardships and the bleakness of the situation Tomiko and all the inmates had to endure at Heart Mountain. This poem, on the other hand, expresses not so much physical hardship as psychological pain, pressure, and fear. On a day when some of the prisoners were allowed to go into the nearby town of Powell to go shopping, Tomiko is confronted by a white person wanting to know what she is. She is fearful of the consequences if she tells the truth, and so I think on the spur of the moment, she lies and says she is Chinese. The other's reaction is to smile and extend a hand. Chinese is okay, Japanese is not. We can only imagine what the reaction might have been had Tomiko told the truth. And of course, all those possibilities, I'm sure, ran through her head. And I can't imagine the kind of fear she must have felt at that point. The second poem is, in honor of the 40 years the Issei have struggled on this continent, the right of naturalization is issued today. 44年、この大陸に一斉の苦闘の誉れは今日の帰化権. I believe this was written, well, on the occasion of their becoming citizens, but also it may also point to the day that that McCarran-Walter Act that I mentioned was passed, because that one of its provisions was to allow citizenship to previously to immigrants who had previously been deemed not worthy of becoming U.S. citizens, so they couldn't even apply to become citizens. I chose this poem because it marks an important stage in the evolution of Tomiko's identity in very, I think, positive, affirmative terms, from Japanese immigrant to enemy alien, and again, an identity imposed by others, to now a proud Japanese American citizen. The original Japanese contains a wonderful phrase that I really like, kutou no homare. I think it's really difficult, maybe impossible to translate directly, but it means something like proud reward for bitter struggle. She is proudly claiming her just reward for the decades of hardship and struggle she endured, the right to be here as a U.S. citizen. So those are my two.
Thank you, Ari. And then I'd like to also share two poems. So the first one is worrying about the unsettled sky above the summit of Heart Mountain. Though our stay is temporary, we planted seeds. 定まらぬハート量の空を案じつつ、仮住みながら種子をまきたり。So I chose this poem because I think it exemplifies the beauty and capaciousness of the Tanka form. Tomiko condenses so much in these 31 syllables. So first, the poem describes the landscape, the majestic Heart Mountain with its iconic summit against probably gray sky, maybe with thick clouds. So Tomiko is worrying about the weather, but this unsettled sky, I think, is also an external manifestation of the uncertainties she feels within, worrying about this life at the prison camp and beyond. The reference to the temporary nature of their stay signifies how she, like her fellow incarcerees, has been forcefully removed from their homes and forcefully relocated to this wartime prison camp. And then thinking about the harsh conditions, the harsh natural conditions that especially expressed in the poem Nancy read for us, this seemingly simple act of planting seeds, I think, speaks volumes. So there's no guarantee that the seeds would sprout and grow in this barren land, this really dry land, yet she plants seeds. So to me, this act of planting seeds, I think, is an attempt on her part to assert agency, to symbolically ground herself in this unfamiliar land and never losing hope for future possibility. The second poem that I chose is also by Tomiko, and this is one she wrote after the Matsumoto family left Heart Mountain to rebuild their lives in Chicago. It reads, to enjoy cultivating a patch of land in this big city of Chicago, also a harbinger of spring. 一坪ほどの土を楽しみ、耕すも大都シカゴの春の先駆け. I chose this poem because I think it too offers a sense of hope. There's this repeated motif of Tomiko tending to the soil. And it's a small patch of land. It's in her backyard. But there's also the awareness that it adds to the beauty and flourishing of the Chicago, the city at large. And I think this is a really wonderful reminder that even in very difficult times, what we do, the seemingly simple act of what we do within our immediate sphere can also contribute to the well-being and flourishing of a larger community, larger society at whole. So thank you so much. And thank you. And so just wanted to quickly turn to you, Nancy, as our team leader. If you could share a few words as a kind of final remark to close this segment, and then we'll move on to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyoko. I'd like to thank our hosts and all of you in the audience, in person and virtual, once again for joining us tonight. At a fraught time in our country's history, when civil and human rights of immigrants are being challenged by our own federal government on a daily basis, the parallels with our own ancestral history are striking. We do bear the responsibility of preserving and sharing our own family histories and doing what we can to safeguard the rights of all immigrants. So I'm very grateful to my grandparents for leaving a moving record of the incarceration in poetry. But there are hundreds, thousands of stories just like theirs unfolding every day. And I hope there will continue to be safe spaces like this where they can be heard. So thank you all again. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So yes, we'd love to open up to Q&A if anyone has any questions, either here in person or via Zoom.
I have one.
Oh, yes, Michelle.
I was curious about, when you mentioned that this word for poignant, that I forgot the,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it was very difficult to say, so it was nice. Was there any other challenges or arguments that you guys had within your team on how to translate some certain things? Anyone might things stick out?
Yeah, as a type of argument, with Are is the best example, and there are not so many other words, but so there's another word I always think about, mono, and mono is directly translated, it's just thing, the tangible thing. So for instance, like I ate a delicious thing, or I saw an interesting thing, but in Japanese, it's more like much wider meaning. It means much wider meaning, and often there's a phrase mono omoru, which means it's directly translation thinking things. It's very not poetic phrase. So always very difficult how to. Sometimes in the poet, mono means thinking about lover or thinking about very worried, destiny or all kinds of things. But in this project, what Nancy, can you think about other difficult words to translate?
I was also thinking of touch.
Onomatopoeia.
Yeah, you did a whole section on onomatopoeia. The sound words that was good. You can give some examples of those, perhaps.
Yeah. Patch, in case the
What do we say? Crackling.
crackling,
Yeah.
But in the Ryokuyō's Tanka says it like listening the crackling sound, but he used the verb crackling and also patchy, which is onomatopoeia. So in English, so how to translate patchy part? So we did a crackling and then hopping as a hopping.
Crackling sound. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
There any other questions? Yes, thank you.
Yes, I'm like to direct, hi Nancy, I just want to direct this towards you. Yeah, I just so admire your taking your grandparents' legacy to this place. It's so evocative for them to write poetry during a time where, this was going on, and then afterwards to have this continue to live on at a time when, generally people, that were in prison did not talk about anything about what happened. It was just kind of like, move forward, let's not dwell on all this. Did your grandparents speak more, emphatically about, just in regular conversation about their stories? Did they ever try to interpret any of these poems to you as a kid or?
No, that's the crazy thing, is that I feel that they were very typical Issei who never talked about it. And when they did talk about it, it was kind of in passing and kind of like camp. Yeah, there was that time when we did some fun things. So I really feel that without this personal record that was written in the moment, I would never know these stories, because they did not try to pass it on. They didn't ever say, by the way, we have this poetry book and maybe one day you'd like to read it to know what happened. There was nothing like that. It's just, I knew that this book sat on my parents' shelf and no one ever talked about it. I think in other talks I've spoken about how the Nisei generation really had no idea what was going on with their parents. There was the language divide, there was the loyalty divide. They were very pro-American, while their parents were at least somewhat torn and probably more sympathetic to Japan. So there was so many reasons why the Nisei really did not know all the things that the Issei were doing, including writing incredible poetry and meeting in groups and sharing information and all kinds of forms of mutual aid that went on that I think as Nisei and Sansei, we just really didn't understand. So it's just ironic that they didn't try to live that in their everyday lives, but they happened to leave this artifact that we just happened to translate. And, it's really kind of a treasure trove of feelings and emotions and firsthand experiences that we don't have a lot of from the Issei generation.
So do you think they just really did this for their own mental health, like as a way of therapy?
I think they loved Tanka. They really were passionate about writing it, but they were also not so egotistical that they wanted to push it on the next generations. They were quite the opposite. They were very, self-effacing and area. I don't know if your parents, how they talked about their Tanka writing before you, if it was the same way or not, but that's at least how my grandparents were.
Yeah. Well, they didn't, try to, push me in any one direction or other as far as the poetry is concerned. But the whole idea of these, amateur poets, amateur in the best, original sense of the term, of those who love, right? Those who love the poetry and composing. The idea of then, if a number of people get together and do this, basically their meetings, Tanka meetings or haiku meetings, whatever, functioned as workshopping, reading each other's work and critiquing and helping. Then the next natural, obvious step for them would be to publish them. And usually the first step would be either publishing in a newspaper. This is in Japan and also in Los Angeles. There's a Japanese language newspaper that publishes local poets' work. And then if you really, are committed to this, and if you have enough members who are committed and enough core, members who continue, well, what's your next step? A collection to publish in book form. And of course, a lot of groups never got that far, and a lot of people never got that far. But there are other books, they just haven't been translated into English.
Yeah. So what is so impressive is the level of seriousness,
Yes.
commitment, real engagement. And it just didn't, when we were in Chicago, we met some Tanka poets who were younger, but they talked about how the Tanka Kai, the club, had sort of petered out with the Shin Issei. It just didn't have the same sense of urgency, and maybe it comes from being a whole generation that's cut off from your country in a way that today Shin Issei are not, and really wanting to preserve the culture.
Right.
I mean, that could be.
I think a lot had to do with the fact that today we could end this meeting and then immediately Zoom somebody in Japan, and
Right.
real time there's a connection. You can have the real time connection, and of course 90 years ago, 100 years ago, 70 years ago, even 50 years ago, that was very different. And so they sort of, I think they clung to each other. They clung to these practices. I remember my father was often asked, why did you start? Why did you start to study and then write Tanka? And he said that he felt that there was no uruoi in their lives. And uruoi means, maybe one of you can help me here, moisture, in a dry environment. Southern California is very dry, as you know, but it was also meant metaphorically, a dry culturally for them, okay, and that it provided water to their souls, and that's why he started. And when you think about how they may have known Tanka before, but how they started, the Matsumoto started, right? Tomiko and Ryokuyō started their serious study and writing in the camps. I mean, look at the environment they were in. This, you know, I can see where they would cling to to this. Yeah.
Thank you.
If you have time.
Yes, one more question.
Yeah, I was just wanted to ask all of you about this sense of what resonated so much for me in the choices that of the readings was the sense of the planting seeds feels a lot to me like the finding a home, and the writing was a kind of finding home because of this crazy suspension of displacement of the wartime hysteria and just not having a place. So where is home? What's home? So how do you find that? Can you find that home by establishing some kind of a center, by establishing some kind of a practice, by making space for your creativity, and connecting, and a feeling of belonging. So like, what does it mean to be home? Or do you take your home? You must make your home. I mean, all of these questions seem to be so resonant, and I wondered if, that speaks to, some things that you understood as opposed to the translation. Or
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Mariko. I think that's a really beautiful reading of the poems. And Nancy, I wonder if you have anything additional that you might like to share.
Yeah, I think so much of the poetry is evoking the old country. My grandparents really knew so many different names of plants and trees, and every time they would see something like a beach rose, they would think of where they saw it in Japan or where it would grow in Japan and the feelings of it evoked for them. And there were also countless accounts of sharing. When I talked about mutual aid, having friends from Oregon send them apples from the Hood River, or having someone from, I don't know if it's Ann Arbor, Michigan, sending tororo for our taro for tororo imo, or someone giving them myogai or some little thing that they were planting. And so the poems are filled with references to things that they would get or grow or eat or enjoy in the old country. And so I think there was constantly that effort to recreate Japan in this new country that they were part of. And it was very much, I think poetry was very much of a piece with it, like you said about the planting seeds. They loved to garden, and my grandmother loved to cook. So cooking dishes that she loved eating back home would make her feel very natsukashi, very nostalgic about things that she used to eat. So I think a lot of the book is really remembering. And that's why this whole period of going back, as Ari writes about, it's jarring because it's not quite the Japan they remember. And so much of this is a classic immigrant thing where the country that you came from is really an imaginative thing in your head. It no longer exists when you go back. And that's sort of the poignant truth about being an immigrant and being away from your home for a long time. You're kind of keeping a culture that's been frozen in amber.
Right.
But yeah, thank you.
There's one audience question.
Yeah, I think really close to start from here. I think we just had a question from the audience about learning more about where to buy by the shore of Lake Michigan.
Okay, thank you so much, Julia. That's a great question.
I was just trying to share. Can I try to share again? I don't know why it wasn't working, but we have a page.
This is our book. Great.
I don't know why I'm not being able to.
Desktop.
No worries. We can send it around after, Nancy. No worries. You can
Yeah.
send it.
Okay. Okay.
So
Sorry.
that's okay. If anyone is interested in purchasing the book, unfortunately, we were hoping that copies of By the Shore of Lake Michigan would be here tonight, but it's in its third printing, and the books are still with the printer and not yet arrived at the press, the UCLA Asian American Studies Center Press. They are expected to arrive around March 9th, 10th, 11th. But to make up for the delay, UCLA Asian American Studies Center Press will cover the shipping costs. So if you could use this QR code here, to order the books, that would be lovely. So thank you for that question. And maybe this is a good time to wrap up. So thank you so much again for joining this evening, both here in person and online. And thank you, Nancy, Ari, and Mariko for joining.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for coming.